I'll make it even worse next.
Charles, his father used to have the throne. He wants it back. William Augustus, his father has the throne, wants to keep it. Fight. Nice and simple, right? So, into this mess enters Charles. Charles being James's 25-year-old son and heir. He is going to set sail for Scotland in the summer of 745, land on the west coast, and raise his standard in rebellion. Your weapon, the brown bess flintlock musket, so called a flintlock because of the piece of flint right there. Now, this is nice and simple, easy to use. You can teach a man to fire it in about 13 minutes. So, pay attention, sir, it's going to save your life.
And this is the one we always like to do at the end of the day, just to have a little bit of fun with you. Now, what is behind this Jacobite myths and mysteries is that these are the questions we get asked the most about here at Culloden. So it's kind of a brief way to tell you quite a lot about what goes on here in the form of a true and false quiz. So we're going to, instead of you asking us the questions today, we're going to ask you. So we'll ask you a question and then we'll ask you to decide whether it is true or false, the statement that we make, and then we will explain one way or the other. But there is a little catch. There are 10 questions, and you have to get at least 6 right, or there are consequences. What are the consequences, Gavin?
The consequences are, clearly, we have failed in our duty to instruct and to educate all of you. So you'll be spending the night here at the museum to do some extra study, extra practice, and we love to talk. So do make sure you score more than 6, or you will be spending the night with us.
Yeah, or blocking your ears. Actually, there is one question that's not on here that we get asked the most. The most asked question here at Culloden, Faye.
Where is the toilet?
We didn't put that one on here.
But just in case you are needing, it is down the exit corridor around the right by the front entrance. Perfect.
Okay, question number 1, if you're all ready. Are Jacobites called Jacobites after Jacob from the Bible? Is this true or false? True? Give me a wave. False? Give me a wave.
Oh wow, knowledge.
Faye, go on. It's been a long day.
It is false, you're right. It's actually named after James. James is the Latin name for Jacobus. So it's Latin. So that's where it comes from. Easy peasy.
I know, got a lot of people with that one, right?
Yes. So let's have a look at question 2. I think make it a bit more.
We gave you a nice, easy one to start.
Question 2. Did all the clans support Charles Edward Stuart? Now, is this true or false? Hands up if you think this is true.
We're totally not giving it away at all. Who thinks it's false? Yeah.
Wow. What clever bunch we got here today.
Kind of gave that away. Well, the first 2 are to ease you into it, make sure you get it. Because we also want to go home, so we want you guys to get us some points. Now, did all the clans, that is the key point there, all of the clans. Now, contrary to popular misconceptions, this is not an England versus Scotland war. This is not Highlanders being Jacobites, Jacobites being every Highlander. This is a British Civil War, which splits the country, splits the clans right down the middle. So some Highland clans will fight for the Jacobites, but many will actually fight against them in support of the British government. And most just try to stay out of the whole thing, try to survive. So Charles, he doesn't get all the clans. He only gets about 1,500 Highlanders. Now, that sounds pretty impressive. But if he got all the clans, he could have had an army of nearly 40,000 Highlanders. Imagine for a moment the difference that could have made on this battlefield.
Different outcome, I guess.
Now, this is where they start to get a bit tricky. Question number 3. The Jacobites were supported by many Catholics, but also many Protestants. They had both Catholic and Protestant support. Who thinks that is true? And who thinks that is false? Our first divide.
Splitting now.
All right.
Shall I do that one?
Go for it.
Well, it is in fact true. There were Catholics and Protestants fighting on both sides here. And it's kind of hard to imagine because Bonnie Prince Charlie himself was, of course, Catholic, but what he was promoting was freedom of religion. Now, although the British government army would have been supporting Protestantism, it was the high forms of that. So Anglicanism, Episcopalian, all those kind of forms of Protestant. But if you were a Quaker or a Baptist or a Methodist, one of these smaller kind of forms of Protestantism, you were not recognised under that law. Whereby Bonnie Prince Charlie was saying, I don't care what you can practice what you like. Now, whether he would have stuck to that if he'd been the king, we'll never know. But certainly, they were both fighting on both sides. This was not Catholics versus Protestants.
Question number 4.
The French provided money and arms, but no soldiers. Now, is this true or false? And this is as well a bit of a tricky question. So, who agrees with this statement? The French provided money and arms, but no soldiers.
Is that true?
True?
Who thinks it's false? Well, first, before we answer, do we have anybody from France in the building today?
Gavin, you're good.
Okay, so I've got to be diplomatic and not accidentally cause an international incident.
Two French.
Okay, so
Gavin, be nice.
now, it's a bit of a trick question. Because it is false in the sense that the French did actually provide soldiers to fight here at Culloden. But it's kind of true because none of those French soldiers were actually French. Who were they then? Well, that'll give you a clue. The clue is in the name. The most French names you've ever heard. The Royal Scots and the Irish Pickets. The Irish Piquets and the Royal Écossais. French regiments comprised of Scottish and Irish soldiers. Political exiles who left Britain to go fight for France, only to return here to Britain to fight the British.
So Gavin, whoa. Let me just get this straight. So they're English and Scottish.
And Irish.
And they go to France
Yep.
to join the French army,
Yep.
to come back to Scotland,
Yep.
to fight as the French army in Scotland.
Against the British Army.
Against the British army. Got it.
Make sense?
Now, question 5. English volunteers formed their own regiments. Now, is this true or is this false? Hands up if you think, oh, this could be true. Scott thinks
But
it's
there is
true.
enough English support who thinks that is true.
Who thinks that's false? Who hasn't got a clue?
Told you they're going to get tricky.
Now, this in itself is again a tricky question. The English, there were enough Jacobite support to form their own regiment within the Jacobite army. In fact, in Manchester, an old Jacobite regiment was formed, and it was called the Manchester Regiment. But the Manchester Regiment didn't actually fight here at the Battle of Culloden. So we can say, yes, there was English support for the Jacobite army, but they didn't fight here.
Yeah, actually their story is a little sad because they did march with the Jacobite army all the way down to Derby. And then as they marched back to Scotland, once the Jacobite army was turned around at Derby and came back to the Highlands for the winter, the Manchester Regiment were left at Carlisle. Their job was to garrison the castle at Carlisle because the Jacobites were looking for a nice, easy entry back to England on their second turn around, which never came. But sadly, after the Manchester Regiment were left there, in a matter of days, the castle at Carlisle was taken back by the British government army, and the consequences to the men of the Manchester Regiment were very severe. Because they were English, they were considered deserters. Therefore, the officers were all either shot or hung, drawn and quartered, and all the rest of the regiment were actually sent overseas for 7 years of indentured servitude in the colonies of either the Caribbean or the east coast of the United States. So basically what they were doing is serving as slaves alongside the enslaved peoples. They could not be bought or sold, but they still had to serve 7 years before they could win their freedom. And often they were treated far more harshly than the enslaved peoples because they weren't worth any money. They didn't sell them for anything. So a really rather sticky and horrible end to the Manchester Regiment. Question number 6. Now this refers to Derby. We're thinking about Derby here. The Jacobites retreated from a larger government army at Derby. Is this true or false? Is this you? You make a note. So at Derby, the Jacobites retreated from a larger government force. If you think that is true, give me a wave. If you think that is false, give me a wave. We did warn you they were going to get harder.
I think it's badly written.
Who wants to take this one? You want this one, Gavin?
Well, it's a bit of a trick question. You know how this game is played. Because it's technically true, the Jacobites did retreat from a larger British army. But it's also technically false, because that larger British army didn't actually exist. It was false intelligence planted by a British spy. The Jacobites were hoodwinked. They thought they were retreating from a larger British army, but in reality there was nobody in front of them. If they had dared to risk everything and push on to London, they would have found out there was nobody in the way. And they would have found the city relatively undefended. They probably would have taken it. Charles probably could have won, and you'd be having this quiz a lot for herself.
So we're all on to question number 7. The government army at Culloden included a significant number of Scots. Now, is this true or is this false? Raise up your hand if you think this is true.
Oh, I see some people from my tour here and they know and they know their hats up. I don't have to stay tonight. I've done my job.
Hands up if you think it's false. Don't be shy. It's okay.
Well, they all know. The answer now, haven't I? A little happy dance, get that away.
Okay, Val, present your answer then.
While doing the dance, please.
Yes.
The government at Culloden did indeed include a significant number of Scots. This is true. We have been banging on about this to you all day. This was a civil war. This was not about England versus Scotland. It did not matter which country you came from. It was which king you wanted to sit on the throne. So yes, indeed, there were a significant number of Scots in the British government army. In fact, we think there were probably more Scots in the British government army than there actually were in the Jacobite army, believe it or not. What do you mean?
Question 8. You're getting there slowly but steadily. The Jacobite broadswords were likely to lose against government muskets. Now, is this true or is this false? Hands up if you think this is true.
So we're asking about technology there. Do you think the British Army, using their muskets, has a technological advantage over the Jacobites?
Yeah? Who says this is false? Okay, good divide. Gavin, the technical expert.
Pressure.
You may.
Well, it's technically false. Because the difference is not in technology. The Jacobites are not a technological disadvantage. If you have this popular idea that the Jacobites are a bunch of crazy wild tribesmen charging the wars with swords, not true. That's Victorian propaganda. The Jacobites were very well equipped, very well organized, and very well led, more than a match for the British Army. In fact, every single Jacobite soldier on the field has a musket. Not every single one of them have a sword. Why? Because swords are expensive, take time and training to use. A musket's cheap, and you can train a man to fire in about 30 or so minutes. The difference isn't in technology, it's how they use them. The British Army is a bit more defensive, tries to shoot you off the field. The Jacobites are much more aggressive. They actually use the musket and broadsword in combination. Something known as a tactic known as the Highland Charge. It's a very aggressive tactic, and it wins them every single battle until Culloden. The thing to consider is, if that statement was true, the Jacobites are always likely to lose, then how come they never do until Culloden? They win every single other battle during this rebellion aside from this one.
end of the battle, Jacobite fatalities were almost exactly 10 times as many as that of the government soldiers. Is that true or false? If you think it is true, give me a wave. If you think it is false, give me a wave. Okay, if you think it is false, I have another question for you. Do you think that number is higher or lower? If you think it's higher, give me a thumbs up. If you think it is lower, give me a thumbs down. This is like a game show, isn't it? Higher, lower. Who wants to take this one? Me? Me again? Okay, well, it is in fact significantly higher. Significantly. So it's false. It's a false statement because it's not 10 times as much. Now, the official government propaganda that we have here tells us that only 50 government soldiers died in comparison to 1,500 Jacobites. So what that would actually mean, if we have our maths heads on, is that it is 30 times as many Jacobite fatalities to British government army. However, I would like to point out that it is a propaganda. The British government army tell us that officially only 50 men died, but they win this battle. They have the right to write the history behind it. Do we really believe that only 50 government soldiers died here at the Battle of Culloden? Probably not. It's probably significantly higher than that. But our numbers here are based upon what is official. Question number 10. That's all right. No. I don't talk too much anyway.
Last question, guys. So, a bounty was offered for the capture of Charles Edward Stuart, Bonnie Prince Charlie. The enormous reward of £30,000 was never claimed. Now, do you think this is true or do you think that is false? Hands up if you think this could be true. Oof, we've got quite a lot of people say this could be true. Hands up if you think this is false. Anybody thinking this is false? I saw a couple of hands there. Okay. Yeah? Sure.
Hey, why not? It could be true.
Gavin?
Well, ladies and gentlemen, you know how we work. It's another trick question.
Trixie.
Now, before I actually reveal the answer to you, I've got another question for you. £30,000, that is about £2.5 million of today's money. So, if you happen to come across Charles and knew there was a bounty on his head for £2.5 million, would you turn it in?
Never.
That was too quick off the mark.
Maybe.
Exactly, you definitely at least think about it. Which is why it's technically true but false. Because it is claimed, but it's just never claimed on Charles. Many people will put forward false claims, claiming they found him to get a reward. In fact, one poor chap, who just happens to look like Charles, has his head chopped off by two men intent on claiming the reward, who present the man's head and go, hey, there's Charles, please pay us. The British man goes, no, that is not Charles, you just murdered an innocent man, you're under arrest. In reality, though, it's never actually claimed on Charles himself. He is on the run for around 6 months in the Scottish Highlands, and no Highlander who comes across him, either Jacobite or government supporter, ever turns him in. In fact, the woman who famously helps him escape by disguising him as an Irish maid, Laura MacDonald, is famously a government supporter, and yet she helps enemy of the state number one escape. Beautiful fault.
So, it's time to add those scores up, ladies and gents. Time to fess up. Let us know, please, is there anyone in this room who got less than 6?
Who earned their roadside ticket?
Nobody's fessing up at all. Very smart. So we've done our job, so I think we can all go home now.
Okay.
But ladies and gents, in all seriousness, thank you for taking part. You've got about 25 minutes left before the museum closes. Whatever you've done, I can suggest the next 11 minutes to you. Go pop in and see our film in the 360-degree immersive theatre. It's 4 minutes long. It's like standing in the middle of the battle. Go to the battlefield table and watch the battle through from above and turn the volume up. 7 minutes. It shows you everything from a bird's eye view. And then you've still got minutes left over to wander around.
Okay.